Hey there. You might have listened to these stories before, but I'm bringing it back with a brand new sound mix. The previous version had some audio problems, so I wanted to make sure you get the best possible experience. Hope you enjoy the remastered version. We were on our way home after watching the new Hunger Games movie. My sister Olivia was falling asleep next to me. We were all silent, listening to the radio when my dad suddenly came to a full stop. It took me a second to realize what he had seen. A small truck was blocking most of the road in front of us. "What's going on there?" Olivia asked in a sleepy voice. That's when a young woman stumbled out of the truck and walked around it to the side that wasn't in vision. Her legs seemed to be hurt. She was grabbing the side of the truck to stay in balance. My parents immediately got into helper mode, seeing a person who didn't look much older than their children. I guess she was around 20 or so. "Stephen, call 911. I'll go check if she's all right," my father said. "Maybe we should stay in the car and wait for help, honey. I've seen people tricking people into getting out of their car, and we can't just sit here and wait, Mary. There might be someone even more hurt on the other side." Before my mother could say anything else, he was already stepping out of the car. My mother opened her door to follow. "Kids, lock the car and stay inside." We were stopped on a quiet road. Around us were only trees. They slowly walked towards the other side of the truck. My father called out to the stranger. After that, we didn't hear anything else. I grabbed my phone and called an ambulance. "Should we check on them?" Olivia asked after a while. "I don't know," Mom said. Before I could finish my sentence, my mother appeared from the back of the truck. Her face had lost all its color. She was walking fast and determined. When she reached the car, Olivia unlocked the doors. She sat down behind the wheel without a word. Her expression was eerily calm. "Mom?" I whispered. "What's going on? Is someone hurt?" My mother didn't respond. And suddenly she opened her mouth as wide as humanly possible and screamed from the top of her lungs. I unbuckled my seatbelt, leaned over and grabbed her by the shoulder. "Mom? Mom, what happened?" Olivia shouted and grabbed her door handle, but before she could open it, my mother had locked all the doors. She stopped screaming and took a few breaths before she hit the gas and started driving in reverse. After we were so far away that we couldn't really see the truck anymore, she turned around and took a different road to our home. She didn't respond to us. She didn't answer any questions. We kept asking about Dad, but she said nothing. Next to me, Olivia started crying, and then she took out her phone to call the police again. When we reached our driveway, my mother finally unlocked the car. Still silent, she walked straight home. Olivia and I exchanged a look of fear and shock. Then she jumped to the front of the car. "I'm going back, you go inside." "No, I'm coming with you." Even from inside the car, we heard the shrill sound of my mother's scream coming from our house. We ignored it and kept driving until we found the road with the trees. I kept trying to call my dad the entire time, but it went straight to voicemail. There was a police car waiting, but no sign of a truck. One officer was waiting by the police car. Another one was looking around the side of the road. We jumped out of the car and asked where our father was. The officer told us that they arrived a few minutes ago and that there was no sign of anyone. At first, they asked us if we played a prank on them, but when he saw our concerned faces and listened to our story, he said that they would follow us home and talk to our mother. "Don't worry, we will do anything we can to find your father," he said before we went back into the car. My entire body was trembling. I had never in my life experienced anything this frightening, and I couldn't stop thinking about my dad. I hated that he didn't listen to my mom's concerns. When we reached our house, the lights in the kitchen were on. The officers followed us inside. My mother wasn't screaming anymore, but we heard the kettle in the kitchen. We followed the sound, expecting to find my mother there. I almost cried in relief when I saw that it was actually my dad. His hair was greasy, and he had changed into his pajamas. "Kids, I've been worried sick about you," he said loudly, and then his gaze shifted to the two police officers. "Sir, are you all right?" "Dad, we've been trying to call you. What the hell happened?" Olivia shouted and tried to run to him, but one of the officers held her back. "I'm absolutely fine. Fantastic even. Except for the fact that I had to take a taxi home. The prices of that..." "Sir, we need to ask you what happened to the truck and the woman inside." My dad shook his head. She was fine. Her car just wouldn't start, so I helped her and then she drove off. All good. Was there anyone else with her? My dad shook his head. May we talk to your wife? She already went to bed, but I suppose we can wake her up. One of the officers walked upstairs with my father, while Olivia and I stayed in the kitchen with the other one and explained the situation one more time. When the other officer returned, he explained to us that my mother told the same story about the broken down car. Apparently my mother remembered that the stove was still on, so she quickly drove home with us. You could hear the skepticism in his voice, but there wasn't much else they could do. They gave us their number and told us to call when anything else came up or parents said anything. After they left, I went to touch the stove. It was ice cold. A little after that, my mother started screaming again. I hardly slept that night. We kept asking my mom what had happened, but she didn't answer our questions. My dad just kept telling us that everything was fine and sent us to bed. Finally, my mother stopped screaming and the house turned silent. The next morning, I walked down and heard the sound of laughter. My parents were standing in the kitchen making pancakes without a care in the world. Olivia was already sitting by the table, staring into nothing in front of her, her expression empty. We locked eyes, and I saw that she had slept just as little as I. Morning, honey. Did you sleep well? My mother said in a melodic voice. Apparently everything is totally fine, Olivia said in a mocking tone towards me. I sat down next to her, and my mother started stacking pancakes on a plate and walked towards me. She stopped right in front of the table and dropped the plate. The shatters flew in all directions. Suddenly, her face turned pale again. Her eyes were opened wide, and then she screamed again, looking at us the entire time. Mom? Olivia jumped up from her seat and grabbed her shoulders. Everything is all right, love, my father calmly said. My mother blinked and looked at the ground. Her face relaxed. Oh, won't you look at that, what a mess, she said and smiled at us. We went through the strangest breakfast we ever had. Olivia and I had stopped asking them what was going on. We didn't get answers anyway. Their attempts to distract us were only frustrating and scaring us more. After breakfast, I followed my sister to her room. Olivia was only a year younger than me, and we'd always been very close. I don't know how I would have dealt with this situation without her. We were both afraid of and for our parents. What do we do? She asked after I sat down on her desk chair. I don't know. Should we call someone? Uncle Freddie, maybe? We didn't have many relatives that lived nearby. Uncle Freddie was the only one, and he was still an hour's drive away. Not sure if he can do anything. They're acting like everything is normal. Except when Mum screams, Olivia said, and a shiver went down my spine at the thought of it. Something happened with that truck. I just wish they would tell us, my sister whispered. Me too. And Dad is acting even stranger. He doesn't even acknowledge her screams. We both sat there for a moment, lost in our thoughts when we heard the door downstairs close shut. And a little later the car started running. Olivia looked out the window. It's Dad. So Mum's alone downstairs. We quietly walked down the stairs and made our way to our living room. My mother was sitting on the sofa. In her hand, she held a needle and yarn, but she wasn't moving. She looked completely spaced out. When she noticed us, she slightly moved her face towards us. Her mouth opened, but this time she didn't scream. She just kept it open. I walked over to her and sat down on the ground in front of her. Please, Mom, talk to us. I don't know if you're trying to protect us from something, but this isn't helping. We're old enough and we are here for you. What happened last night? She blinked and then shook her head as if she was just waking up from a daydream. Her mouth closed again. Her eyes went to me and then to my sister. It's hard to remember. Something keeps blocking my memories. I know that something isn't right, but it's almost as if my mind keeps falling asleep. I can't control it. Olivia came closer and sat down beside me. Maybe we should take you to a doctor. The screaming really scares us, Mom. My mother looked confused. What's screaming? I swallowed. Do you remember anything about that woman? We lost her. Her eyes opened wide. For a moment it looked as if she was smiling, but then her mouth opened so much that her face got all wrinkly. From the looks of it, it was as if she was screaming, but this time no sound came out. I just grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. Finally, her expression softened. Her eyes and mouth closed for a moment. She looked at the terrified faces of my sister and me. Then she tightly grabbed my arm. She wasn't a woman. I don't know what she was. It all happened so fast. But kids... A tear rolled down her cheek. I saw your father die. I don't know who that man is that came back to us. Dread filled my entire body. It felt as if a dark blanket was falling over us. I heard my mother's words, but I just couldn't believe her. I didn't want to. Suddenly I heard the door slam shut. Olivia got up and pulled out her phone. She was just about to call an ambulance when my father walked into the room. My mother's face changed again. She was smiling, genuinely smiling. Mom isn't feeling well. I'm calling a doctor for her, Olivia said with a trembling voice. She looked at me, and I saw how afraid she was of my dad. She was trying to get us out of here. My father took the phone from her hand and shook his head. No need. Your mother is fine. Everything is perfectly fine. I was actually thinking we could go to the cinema again tonight. I forced my body to get up. That sounds like a fine idea. I haven't seen the new Hunger Games movie yet. How about that one? He smiled. That sounds like a terrific idea. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet either, Olivia added. Can you get our coats from upstairs, Dad? He got up without a word and walked up the stairs. Olivia and I each grabbed one of my mother's arms. Together we quickly walked her outside and got her into the car, still wearing our pajamas and no shoes. Where are we going? My mother asked from the back seat. We're going to visit Uncle Freddie, Olivia answered in a shaky voice. But honey, we can't just leave your dad here. He'll get lonely. Growing up, there wasn't anything my brother couldn't talk his way out of. Detention, speeding tickets, fights. No matter what, he always found a way to talk himself out of trouble. I thought he was invincible, like there wasn't anything he couldn't scheme his way into or out of. So naturally I was surprised when the police found his body. His body had been mummified, decorated, and held in a position of high honor in a small A-frame cabin deep in the wilderness that operated as a shrine to his life and teachings as leader of the Green Soul Circle, a small cult that he started years ago. A hunter was the one who found him. He had sprained his ankle and hobbled to the A-frame in order to ask for help, but instead found my brother, or what was left of him. I shouldn't laugh, but I imagine the poor guy forgot about his ankle pretty quickly after that. After the shrine was investigated by the police, they transferred to me control of my brother's body, as well as a small cache of his personal belongings that had also been found within the shrine. I didn't want anything to do with any of it. As far as I was concerned, Glenn stopped being a member of my family a decade ago. My parents and I tried hundreds of times to talk some sense into him, to let him drop all the hippie cult bullshit and come home to start over, but all we ever got in return was misery. He'd call us names, mock us, and laugh in our faces as we pleaded through tears for him to come home. How many times could you go through that before you sever ties with the person? I decided I had enough when he hung up on our mother after she told him she had terminal cancer. Dad had passed away years before in a car accident, and Glenn never showed up for the funeral. But their relationship had always been rocky. With Mom, I thought it would be different, and I couldn't have been more wrong. He shamed her for her diagnosis, told her it was the culmination of all the shitty lifestyle choices she'd made. Then he hung up. My mom died 6 months later without hearing from him again. I never attempted to contact him once she died. I also changed my phone number so even if he wanted to call, he wouldn't be able to reach me. In my mind, he might as well have died the same night as my mother. So imagine my surprise when suddenly I'm placed in charge of that asshole's mummified corpse. In addition to all of that, here's another cherry on top of the shit sundae. I was pregnant at the time, about 6 months into it to be more specific. You want some sprinkles for that sundae? I was single. Mommy's little miracle is the result of a one-night stand. I don't want to sound like I was resentful of my unborn baby. I love him. Yes, it's a boy. And I could not wait to welcome him into the world. I just cannot emphasize enough how stressed out I was. So back to the body. I didn't think he deserved a memorial or a service, so I cremated him and threw his ashes in the river. Easy as pie. No muss, no fuss. The box of my brother's belongings, curiously, wasn't as easy to toss out. Sure, most of it immediately went into the trash. Old clothes, a dirty water bottle, and some ratty books with titles like The Metaphysical in You and Awaken, 30 Exercises to Open Your Third Eye. All that stuff was easy to throw away, but some things I kept. There was a really nice dream catcher I thought was cute. A large collection of crystals and geodes in my brother's journal. Those stayed with me. Just to be clear, I'm not some crystal-kissing Walmart Wiccan who thinks crystals produce healing energies or anything like that. I just thought they were pretty. I know this seems like a weird thing to mention, but if you're like me and your older brother ran a cult for nearly 15 years, you'd probably want to make that distinction too. The journal, on the other hand, stayed because I was curious. Despite knowing my brother my entire life, I'd never really known him. He was 5 years older than me, which isn't that much in the adult world. But when you are a kid, 5 years is a lifetime. We operated in separate worlds and ran in different circles. By the time I grew to the age of independence, he'd already moved upstate to start his commune, and the little connection I had with him made me not want to know him. It's a weird feeling, knowing someone your entire life and truly considering them a stranger, especially when you're made out of the same stuff. What if we were more alike than I'd ever known? Despite my curiosity, I couldn't open the journal for a few days after I had received it. It made me too angry. When I finally did pick up the journal to read it, I found the same smug dickhead I remembered. Have you ever been on the internet? Ever turned on the TV? Ever listened to your friend's crazy uncle proudly shoot off Fox News talking points like he's the captain of the debate team? There's money to be made in these hills. The more I talk to people, the more I see they just want something to believe in. A shoulder to cry on. A crutch. They don't want to think. They want to be told. It doesn't even have to be real. It just has to make them feel good. Magic rocks that pull the ache right out of your head. A candle that settles dissonant vibrations. Call cucumber water, a beverage that promotes a healthy lifestyle, and they will drive for miles to buy it. Create a common enemy. What really is in that vaccine? Did you know doctors use cells from aborted fetuses? The hospital is a waiting room for death. There is money to be made in these hills. That's the parasitic, cynical asshole I remember. I was debating whether to put the journal down or keep reading when there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find a delivery man. "Are you Candace?" the man asked. I nodded. "Delivery for you," the postman said, holding out a clipboard and a pen. "I need you to sign for it." I complied, and the man handed over a small cardboard box about the size of my palm. I took the box into my kitchen and used a knife to open it. Inside, nestled in a bed of hay, was a smooth river rock. Painted onto one side of the rock was a bear, shaggy and brown with a crown on its head. Painted on the reverse was a single word: hibernation. I assumed it was leftover evidence from my brother's shrine and the police had forgotten to toss it in with the others. I dropped the rock in the trash and carried on with my day. I didn't pick up the journal for another few days. Work had been hell and being pregnant wasn't getting any easier. I was tired and hungry all the time. I was starting to show and the excess weight was starting to make my back hurt. I suppose you probably have questions about my pregnancy, with it being such a scandal and all. I was in a dark place. Life was kicking my ass. Work sucked. My friends seemed to be losing interest in me, and I was losing interest in them. I started isolating, spending hours alone thinking about mistakes I made and opportunities I'd squandered. Then I started to drink. For a while, I became a regular at a bar downtown. A divey sort of place where a depressed girl like me can get a few drinks without running into someone I'd know. I became acquaintances there with a few other barflies, but mostly we kept to ourselves. Isolation was why most of us were there in the first place. Except for one guy, Matt. Matt showed up there shortly after I did. He was new to the city and had just moved in down the street. He was sweet, friendly, and could talk to anyone about anything. He had long brown hair and 5 o'clock shadow that accentuated his jawline and had arms like a shaved gorilla. And because I was generally the only girl in that bar on any given night, he started to pursue me. I put up my walls for the first few weeks. But as I spiraled and he kept building me up, eventually I caved and we went back to his place. I left quickly as soon as the sun rose and I didn't go back to the bar for a month out of shame. It was around the end of that month I realized I was pregnant. Thinking back, I'm surprised I didn't start to spiral further. Instead, I got tough. I decided I'd quit drinking, I'd keep the baby, and that Matt would never know. I started to live for someone else instead of just living for myself. And that saved my life. I used to like to imagine Matt still showed up there every night and waited for me. He sits in a dark booth in the corner of the room and only lifts his head to see who's walking through the door of the bar. It's always another biker. A tear rolls down his cheek. Eventually I found the time, energy, and willpower to pick the journal back up. It seemed like Glenn tried lots of different ideas before he found one that worked for him. He went QAnon for a while but found it too decentralized. He tried to form another right-wing organization called Liberty Union, but found he just attracted a bunch of gun nuts and doomsday preppers. Then he went back to the original ideas he had in his first journal entry, and started the hippie commune, the Green Soul Circle. We got 20 or so people up with us now. Once I got 3 or 4 people up here, it just started to snowball fast. I've got people on Twitch, YouTube, and Instagram. We're doing podcasts and morning shows daily. We're selling product and hauling in donations like you wouldn't believe. Candles are on back order. Sage is selling well. Profit margin on that is insane. And the crystals are flying off the shelves. No one would believe me if I told them how much money I was making. I can hardly believe it myself. The only downside is living up here with these people. I tell them I need to be alone for 4 hours a day for mediation, but that is just about the only time I can get to myself. They hound me constantly, asking for advice, spiritual cleansings, energy readings. I don't even know what half those words mean, but I grin and bear it. I give them an answer, generally some bullshit I read somewhere, and it makes them happy. They work for room and board and a few bowls of quinoa, so I guess I shouldn't be complaining that much. Yep, Glenn is still an asshole. Huge surprise. Another knock on my door disturbed my reading. This time it was a pizza delivery man. I didn't order a pizza, I said before the man could even utter a word. I think you have the wrong address. This is an order for Candace? He replied before reciting my address. Yeah, that is my name and address, but I didn't order a pizza. Well, you need to pay for the pizza or it comes out of my check. Get whoever ordered it to pay for it. You ordered it. This had to be the dumbest conversation of my life. I must have stood on my front porch yelling at the pizza man for 15 minutes. It only ended because my neighbor Tom, a sweet 60-year-old widower, heard the yelling and came out and offered to take the pizza himself. I sat back down on the couch and picked up reading where I left off. Glenn at this point had taken to calling himself, and having his followers call him Brother Bear, which is an incredibly stupid name. Although I do suppose if you were some hippie influencer, you'd probably have an easier time selling candles as Brother Bear than Glenn, which sounds like a middle manager at an accounting firm. John Glenn, Glenn Beck, Glenn Close. There aren't too many well-known Glens that fit the image of Earth Healer. I passed another hour reading of Brother Bear and his infinite money machine when the passages started to get dark. They'll do anything I tell them to. Anything. Worm annoyed me so much I made him spend the night out in the rain. But he won't leave. I emptied his bank accounts. I fucked his wife. I gave him the name Worm and he still won't leave. If anything, he's my most loyal follower. I think I underestimated how blindly loyal people can be once they've found a place that accepts them. As much fun as it is to have a community enthralled to me, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, shit. I'll probably be able to retire to an island in a few years if we keep going at this rate. I told them we need to plan my succession. What I meant was, in a few years, I'll go live in a mansion somewhere while Wolf or someone else takes over day-to-day operations, and I'll finally get some peace and quiet. How they interpreted that is that I need an heir. I can barely get out of bed before one of these bimbos jump on my dick saying they want to be the vessel that carries the next messiah. Joke's on them. I'm infertile. I got a vasectomy at 24 because I never wanted to have kids. This will be easy enough to turn on them in the end, so I'll keep it going for now. Maybe I'll even let Worm watch. I could not believe I was related to this person. We grew up in the same house, ate the same foods, went to the same schools, but Glenn somewhere along the line turned sour. My skin rippled with disgust. Then a second ripple of goosebumps rode a wave down my arm. I felt a cold breeze fill the house. I got up from the couch to find the back door to my house wide open. Thinking the wind must have blown it open, I closed it and went to bed. The next morning I woke up, more tired than usual. Pregnancy sucks. Constantly uncomfortable. Never sleeping. Always tired. Hips hurt. Back hurts. Misery. I'm not sure how all those ladies on TV say they loved being pregnant. I gingerly take the stairs to the kitchen and open the fridge to start making some eggs for breakfast. I only notice when I have the eggs on the counter that they aren't the grade A white eggs that I bought. They are brown, like they just came from a farm. At the time I didn't make the connection. I was still groggy and had a headache, and honestly, as soon as I saw the eggs, I instantly lost my appetite. Food aversion is probably the worst part of being pregnant. I poured myself a glass of orange juice and headed to the bathroom for a Tylenol and some vitamins only to open my medicine cabinet and find it completely empty. Someone had removed every single prescription and over-the-counter drug from my house. I felt like I was losing my mind. Instantly, I started roaming the house looking for traces of a home invasion. Room to room I marched, taking a mental picture at each doorway and searching my hormone-riddled brain for what may or may not have been there the day before. Some strange things were missing. Lots of chemical cleaners and aerosol cans. My soaps and shampoos were replaced with some weird all-natural brand. I found 2 bottles of kombucha in my refrigerator. The power cord to my microwave was severed, and there was a strange amount of granola in my pantry. What the fuck kind of home invasion was this? I immediately called the police. While I waited the 15 minutes for the police, I read some of Glenn's journal. I feel like shit today. I've felt like shit for a month. I can't be seen on the live stream selling health products while I look like this. I've got boils on my back and chest. My feet feel numb. Maybe I just need to lay off the booze for a little while. I'll try and stay sober until Wolf comes back. It shouldn't be longer than a month for him to finish his job. Officer O'Hare, the same officer who dropped off the box of Glenn's belongings, showed up at my door and immediately did a walkthrough of the property to confirm we were alone. He found 2 different windows unlocked on the ground floor, as well as several footprints in the mud outside my house. "It's your brother's friends," he said. "I'm sure of it." I shuddered at the thought of a lunatic named Worm tiptoeing through my house as I slept. "How could they have found me?" I asked. "I'm not sure," he shook his head. "Have you spoken with anyone out of your normal circle of friends and work colleagues recently?" I thought, "Not that I can think of." I trailed off. I signed for a package, and I had a weird incident with a pizza delivery guy. "Explain." I told Officer O'Hare about the rock that was mailed to me, as well as the incident with the unpaid pizza, and as soon as I finished, he went out to his car, made a few calls before coming back inside. "You shouldn't have signed for that package," he said. "They probably tracked the box here, then mailed that rock here using a certified letter. Once you signed for it, they received a receipt with your signature on it confirming your location." Fuck. I stewed in the silence for a beat, thinking. And the pizza delivery was just a distraction to get in through the back door, wasn't it? Just long enough to unlock a couple of windows, by the way. You should make sure none of your keys were stolen. If so, you need to change your locks. My keys were missing. After I had filed the police report, Officer O'Hare gave me directions to a nearby motel where I could spend the night. He also told me he'd be emailing some pictures of Glenn's known associates, and I should call him immediately, should I see any of them. I packed my things and went to the motel immediately. I couldn't stand the thought of being in that house. I sat in the motel and watched TV for an hour or so, but I couldn't shake the thoughts of the Green Soul Circle out of my mind. Why on earth would they want anything to do with me? I'd never even met any of them in my entire life. I opened Glenn's journal again, looking for answers. I'm trapped in a prison of my own making. I've killed myself. My kidneys are failing. I can hardly stand, my feet are so swollen. I'm scratching my arms so much they've gone raw and drip with blood. I've begged them all to let me go to the hospital, but they all say the same thing. "You're testing us. We know you'd never want to go to a hospital. A hospital is waiting room for death." I try to crawl out of bed, but my body is so heavy and I'm too weak to fight them off as they drag me back to my room. They just give me more and more kombucha and I keep pissing more and more blood. I tell them it's all fake. I tell them I made it all up. I'm not Brother Bear. My name is Glenn. I'm not the Messiah. I'm a con man. I eat McDonald's. You're testing us. You're testing us. I dug too deep and I'm going to die here. What have I done? I've hated my brother for nearly 15 years. I still hate him, and I'll never forgive him for everything he's done to my family. But I couldn't help but feel sad for him for a moment. What a horrific way to die. A slow, agonizing death, with help so close and readily available, but being unable to get there. This is it. It's coming. I haven't eaten in days. I'm sorry, Mom. I know how you felt as your body broke down around you. It's like being trapped in a burning house, isn't it? I should have called you more. Fuck, I should have been home. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dad. I know we never got along, and that isn't entirely my fault. But I could have made a better effort. You won't believe me, but I was sorry to see you go. I wanted to go to your funeral, but something in me is broken. Candace, I hope this journal makes its way to you. The freaks I live with won't read it. I told them their heads would explode if they saw its pages, ha ha. I need to apologize to you most of all. What I've done to you is unforgivable and you aren't even aware of it. If you read up to this point, you probably read the issue I had with my succession. I never should have brought that up. I'm so fucking stupid. Only those with my blood could bring forth the Messiah. That's all I said. I didn't mean for it to get misinterpreted, but what is religion except the blind leading the blind? They are coming for you, all of them. I'm sorry. I love you. Stay away from Wolf. I could feel the blood drain from my face as I read the passage. Too angry to cry, too sad to scream, and too scared to move. I sat there staring unblinking at the page, trying to process years of trauma, regret, and pure unadulterated rage. It was only when the silence was broken by my phone chiming that I realized I had forgotten to breathe. I took a few deep breaths to steady myself, then opened the email from Officer O'Hare. Here's a collection of photos of known members of the Green Soul Circle. If you see any of them, call me immediately. I clicked on the attachment and nearly vomited at the sight of the first picture. A man with long brown hair and thin 5 o'clock shadow that accentuated his jawline. A solid neck with thick shoulders and arms like a shaved gorilla. It was Matt, the father of my child. Directly under the picture in bold letters was the word, Wolf. I called Officer O'Hare. We never found Matt or Worm or Cicada or Fisher. None of the Green Soul Circle members were ever arrested, but that doesn't mean I didn't keep moving. I moved from town to town, job to job, always afraid and always looking over my shoulder and looking after my son, Jack, who is now in his terrible twos and will never know who his father is. I love my son, but the stress does get to me sometimes, especially those late nights when the rest of the world is asleep. But I'm still awake and looking out my window at the nondescript sedan that has been parked in front of my house for 3 hours. There's always 2 men in the front seats, but they don't get out. They just watch, and eventually, they will drive away. Sometimes the stress gets to me, but I just say to myself, only those with my blood could bring forth the Messiah. I don't sign for packages anymore. I remember the first time I saw the man. The thing with the face, like melting wax. I knew he had many masks and many names. He had followed our family for years, and from father to son, mother to daughter, the fear and terror of the Faceless Man got passed down. Every time he came, he would have a different face. The first time I saw him, he looked like a withered old Asian man, leaning heavily on a wooden cane with a silver top. Our front door stood wide open, and I saw my mother and father standing there, their faces as pale as ghosts as they looked down upon the stranger. I couldn't have been older than 11 years old, but the memory is still as sharp as a butcher's knife stuck into my brain. I walked forwards from the living room, the cartoon noises still blaring loudly in the background. The man looked past them and straight at me. He squinted his eyes and grinned. "Another lamb so pretty and young," he mused. "Isn't it a shame when a child is taken so early in life? And yet God kills children every day. I heard last month a hurricane blew an entire school down and killed 100 of the little bastards in one swift go. So perhaps God will forgive me for my small sins, my taking of a few here and there to keep my appetite satiated." "Get out of here!" my father snarled through gritted teeth. He clenched his fists until the knuckles turned white, looking as if he would strike out at any moment. "Do you know who I am?" the Faceless Man asked in a whispery voice. Then he began chuckling. It sounded like someone trying to laugh with a slit throat. A harsh gurgling sound that raised goosebumps all up and down my body. My father slammed the door shut quickly, locking the deadbolts. I fingered the silver cross my mother had given me nervously. I always did when I was anxious. Feeling it laying there cold against my skin helped bring me back to the moment. My father turned to look at us with panic-stricken eyes. I heard light knocking on the door behind him as the demonic laughter continued to grow louder, until it became all I could hear. Then, without warning, it cut off. When I looked out the peephole on the front door, I saw the front stoop stood empty. "Get my gun," my father said to my mother. She left the room, quietly sobbing as she went. Sunlight from the warm summer sky continued to stream in through the windows. What a beautiful day, I thought to myself. Such a beautiful day. And maybe my last. Then I saw a shadow cross in front of the living room window. I saw someone peeking in with wide, excited eyes. A grin like a skull spread across his leathered old face. As I watched, the face began to drip and contort as it continued to smile. It started slowly around the lips and eyes, and then it began speeding up. Within seconds, I saw the flesh running down his cheeks and chin in rivulets, dripping like flesh-colored wax. Behind the mask he wore, I caught a glimpse of something horrible before new streams of flesh rolled over it from his scalp and forehead. Then the last of the human skin dripped off, and I found myself staring into the face of hell. I could never explain the true horror of the thing lurking behind its costume of human skin. It felt like staring into a pus-filled wound with maggots writhing around the edges, or maybe like falling into a mass grave. Some of its body seemed flipped inside out, with the glistening muscles on the outside, but the bloody demonic face was far more disturbing. It had eyes like two smoldering cigarette burns. Its mouth was a slashed, disgusting thing. The lips looked eaten away, with ragged patches of flesh surrounding them that seemed to make the smile seem much larger, reminding me of how a clown would do his makeup. I saw that grinning mouth filled with countless needle-sharp teeth above black, sore-ridden gums that writhed and shivered in its lipless mouth. Even through the window, a smell like sulfur and reeking, spoiled meat filtered into the house, seeming to fill the air like a physical presence. Its body looked flipped inside out. I could see the quivering muscles on the skinless figure. It looked deathly thin, and veins ran along the outside of its face and body like thick, dark worms, pulsating with each beat of the satanic heart that lay inside that thing's chest, emanating sickness and evil through every pore of its gleaming body. As it stared into my soul with its black, lidless eyes, I saw in that face all the worst nightmares of the universe. I saw mountains of corpses festering under a hot sun, black holes eating worlds as masses screamed. I saw mothers drowning their children in bathtubs, and animals eating each other alive. I saw into eternity, and it looked so dark and empty that I fell to my knees pleading. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" I cried, tears streaming down my face. My father ran in with his shotgun raised, but when I looked back up, the window was empty. Yet the visions continued to run through my mind like a movie, atrocity after atrocity, and somehow it all connected back to the Faceless Man. After a few seconds of utter silence, that deep, gurgling voice rang out, making us all jump. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, reverberating throughout the room. It said something that made my father waver on his feet. A strange verse, but one I remember by heart to this day. Here is Belladonna, the Lady of the Rocks, the Lady of Situations. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here the wheel, and here is the one-eyed merchant. And this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the Hanged Man. After that, we barricaded the doors and locked all the windows. I knew it wouldn't keep the Faceless Man out. He could easily just smash through a window, and perhaps he wouldn't even need to do that. Maybe he could pass inside the house anytime he wanted. And yet, if so, why hadn't he? So it started again, my mother said, looking at my father with a powerful intensity in her eyes. He has come back again for a sacrifice. My father nodded slowly. What do you mean a sacrifice? I asked, my child's mind not comprehending the magnitude of the situation yet. My father hesitated. He eats the souls of people, my father said. He and my great-grandfather drew up a contract a long, long time ago, and ever since our family has had great wealth. You're young, so you don't really understand fully yet. But not everyone lives in mansions like us. Not everyone vacations in Paris and Buenos Aires during summer vacation. Not everyone has a garage full of Porsches and Mercedes. So why don't you just tell him no? I asked in my childish way. We don't need all this money. The left side of my father's face began twitching. He stomped towards me, shouting as tears ran down his face. I don't give a shit about money, he cried. The deal was drawn in blood and cursed from the first day. Do you think if I could get him to go away by giving him everything I own, I wouldn't? I would do it in a heartbeat. I would live in a goddamn trailer and eat instant noodles if I had to. But there is no escape. He looked around, as if expecting to see the Faceless Man standing right behind him. He began looking out of the windows, seeing nothing but a bright summer's day. We need to go, my mother whispered. Now, let's just take Susan and go. He won't find us if we keep moving. He'll find us, my father said, looking defeated. Tears continued to stream down his face. He looked like a defeated man. He always does, but fuck it, let's go. We'll take the bastard on a run around the world. We took off from the property, and my father told me more about the deal as we flew out of town in an expensive Mercedes, redlining the accelerator. I thought more than once he would crash and kill us all in his frenzy to put distance between us and the Faceless Man. Once every 50 years, my father said. He comes. He has his pick of the litter, as he calls it. He takes one child from our family, and in exchange, our wealth is guaranteed for the next 50 years. Even during the Great Depression, our family didn't suffer. Except, of course, the periodic abductions of children. He makes the parents watch as he takes the soul of the child into himself. I don't know what kind of foul magic it involves, but from what I've read in the diaries of my grandfather, it is a very painful ritual that involves skinning the child alive and rubbing their body with special herbs. Then he makes them walk, totally skinned and bleeding to death until they collapse. And that's when he takes the soul. He sucks it out of their eyes. It looks like thin wisps of light when it finally goes. I shook inwardly in horror. No one would ever allow that to happen to their kid, I said confidently. My father shook his head. You act as if we have a choice, he said. The first time, he comes politely, knocks on the door, and tells the parents it is time to fulfill the contract. If they say no, then he leaves. But he always comes back, and the next time, he won't be polite, and he won't leave. He'll come into the house when we're sleeping, torture me and your mother to death, slit our throats, and then take you anyway. He's tireless. He doesn't age. He doesn't sleep. And as far as I know, he can't die. How can we fight against such an evil? By going to the moon. But why would Great-Grandpa make a deal like that anyway? I asked. Because at the time, he had 10 children, and all of them were starving. A few had dysentery, and he didn't have a penny to his name at the time. He chose to sacrifice one, and give it to the Faceless Man to save the other 9. My father shrugged. I don't know if we can understand it. I certainly don't agree with it. I'm not sure he realized at the time that our family would suffer eternally afterwards, and that the contract could not be voided except through death. He laughed bitterly. We should have just let our family line die out, maybe. That would have solved the problem. What about those words at the end, Daddy? I asked. What did those mean? Oh, that's just an old famous poem. My grandfather used to recite it to me before he shot himself. He loved T.S. Eliot, and he thought that poem had some relevance to our problems for some reason. He never got over the loss of his son to the Faceless Man, you see. Never. He used to wake up screaming in the night. He tried to drink his memories away, but in the end, my father braked suddenly, bringing the car to a full stop. I looked up, seeing forests on both sides of us. We hadn't traveled long. A hitchhiker stood at the edge of the road in grimy blue jeans and a bright tie-dye shirt. His long hair rippled around him as he stood with his thumb out, but his face had started to drip and melt. We all saw it and froze. My father reached down below his seat and pulled out the black shotgun. He ran out of the car like a madman, his eyes blazing with anger and terror. "Get out of here!" he cried as if to a rabid animal. Then he raised the gun and fired. The Faceless Man's tie-dye shirt burst into shreds as buckshot tore into it. The Faceless Man smiled, raised his hand to us in a wave and disappeared. The clothes fell limply to the grass below, now totally empty. My father shook his head grimly and turned around to come back to the car. A dark shape zoomed out of the forest, holding a sharp knife. Before my father could turn, he raised it to his throat and pulled. My mother screamed, getting out of the car to go help my father, but he was dead. Even as a child, I knew it. I could see the knife had practically severed his head from his body, except for the spine and a thin bit of flesh on the back. Blood poured out, flooding down his chest as he stood there for a moment, uncomprehending. Then he began to fall forwards and his head snapped back, revealing the gore, muscles, and ligaments beneath. I watched as my mother ran to his side, panic-stricken. The Faceless Man looked on with glee, laughing and shrieking. His black eyes blazed with an inner light as he looked towards me and grinned, showing the 100 needle-sharp teeth behind that suppurating sore of a mouth. My mother looked up at him, trying to grab the gun from my father's stiff hands, but the Faceless Man didn't even flinch. He ran forwards, his sleek, bloody body as fast as a greyhound's. He opened his mouth wide and bit at my mother's face. I saw the teeth bite into her skin, and he began to shake his head like a dog, ripping and shredding. Her face became a mask of gore, and I screamed in the car, nearly throwing up, but something inside told me I needed to move. I wasn't a stupid kid after all. I wasn't going to die here next to some woods in the middle of nowhere. I ran out of the back seat and jumped into the driver's seat. I had never driven a car, but it was, after all, an automatic. It didn't take much intelligence to put it in drive and hit the gas pedal. Of course, I didn't really know how to drive, and I nearly hit a tree. I skidded, turning the wheel, and with 2 bumps, I accidentally ran over my mother and father. The Faceless Man shrieked with laughter as I drove off down the road, crying and screaming in the car. I abandoned it a few hours later in the city. My father had brought a massive envelope of cash with him in the center console, and I counted it with awe. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. I went on the run soon after, moving across the country and living on the money I found. It was 4 years later when I went to a carnival, bored, and decided to have my future read. I hadn't seen the Faceless Man in years, and I figured I'd lost him. If only that were true. The old woman pulled out her tarot card deck and began flipping them over one by one. "Ah," she said in a voice that seemed to deepen. "I see. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here the wheel, and here is the one-eyed merchant." I screamed, backing up quickly as the flesh began to drip off her face. "And this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see." The last of the skin dripped off. The grinning thing beneath rose from the chair, its sleek bloody body and black holes of eyes regarding me with glee. "Ah, yes, I am forbidden to see. But I have seen it. I've seen it. And look what it's done to me, Susan. Look at what it's done. Your mother and father rot in a shallow grave somewhere, picked clean by animals. And now it's just you and me, Susan. And we're alone. The card is blank, but it doesn't have to be. Come and see what it holds. He rose into the air, his bloody skeletal feet dangling feet above the ground. Come and see. I pulled the pistol I always carried out of its holster and began firing at point-blank range into the demonic face and black heart of that thing. People began to scream all around me at the carnival. I turned to run out of the tent, but a cold hand gripped my shoulder. Leaving so soon, the soft voice whispered in my ear, laughing with a sound a drowning man might make. Ah, but we haven't finished, Susan. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the... Suddenly, the hand touched the silver cross my mother had given me as a small girl, and it flinched away. I felt the grip loosen, and I ran without looking back. People had taken cover all over the carnival. Many had started to leave, and I saw agitated police and security trying to find out where the gunshots had come from. I immediately mixed into a large crowd and made my way towards the exit, but I constantly looked back, expecting to see a man with a melting face. Perhaps it would act like a police officer and pretend to arrest me before bringing me to some dark forest and starting the skinning process. I keep running now, but I always look over my shoulder, because the Faceless Man doesn't age, and he doesn't sleep, and he never ever stops looking. I woke up in the most beautiful little place you could imagine. An old town with merchant houses and cobblestone streets overlooking multiple hills. And on top of one of those stood this small Baroque castle. I had been ecstatic about coming here for a small weekend trip with my boyfriend for our 1-year anniversary. There's hardly ever any snow in the city where I live, so being here in December, with the smells and lights of the Christmas markets, felt like a dream. When we arrived the day before, the air was crisp, and all the people in the hotel, the restaurants, and shops were so welcoming. There wasn't any snow yet, but you could smell in the air that it would be coming soon. When I woke up the next morning, the light coming from outside was almost blinding to my sleepy eyes, and I felt a headache settling in. I groggily got up from bed to close the blinds when I saw why it was so light out. A white sheet was gently resting on the homes and streets. It should have been beautiful, if it weren't for all the red. Dark red stains on the white snow. Little drops here and there, but then there were whole puddles as well. "Jacob?" I whispered, but my boyfriend didn't react. I repeated his name louder this time, and he loudly yawned. "What time is it?" he asked. "Come here," I instructed. "It snowed." "That's great, honey. I'll look at it later," he said and turned around. "Please come look at this." He slowly got up from bed and walked towards me. When he looked outside, his expression changed from annoyed to wide awake. "What the hell is this?" We stared out of our window. "It looks almost like blood." "Wine, maybe?" he asked, still staring out the window. I shook my head. "I don't think so. And how did it even get there? Everything around looks untouched." Jacob took a deep breath and turned away from the window. "Ava, do you remember anything about last night?" I swallowed. "I remember a lot of mulled wine." "Yeah, same. No idea how we got back here, though." He laughed. Jacob stumbled back to bed. "I'm sure there's a good explanation for it," he mumbled. I kept staring out the window. A couple came into view. They walked down the street of our hotel, right past one of the bigger puddles, but they didn't even look at it. After a while, I heard Jacob snoring, but I was fixated on the outside. More people came down the street. Some started shoving away the snow in front of their houses. Nobody acknowledged the red snow. After Jacob finally woke up again, we made our way down the creaky wooden stairs to get some breakfast in a cafe. The hotel was small and very old. The entire ground floor had this really ugly red and green carpet, and all the furniture looked like it was from the 80s, but that kind of made it more charming. It almost felt like visiting your grandparents. "Good morning. Did you have a good first night here?" The old gentleman behind the reception greeted us. He had a kind smile on his face and deep wrinkles under his eyes. "Slept like a rock," Jacob said. "But weird question. Do you know anything about the red marks on the snow outside?" I told my girlfriend it's probably wine stains, but... Oh, the red snow, the old man chuckled. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? Especially tourists seem to enjoy the mystery surrounding it. Mystery? I asked. Well, you see, young lady, there is not a definitive answer as to what causes the red snow. Some say it's drunk folks walking home through the snow while spilling the last bits of their mulled wine. But then there would be footsteps, I said. He pointed his finger in the air. Ah, yes. Very good. Well, the other theory has to do with the red bricks that you see around town. They say that when it snows, some of the flakes drop down the facades, take some color down, and then drop to the ground. His gaze started shifting from me to Jacob and back. And others even say that the sky bleeds over our little town to punish it. For what? I asked. Who knows, maybe the people who settled here upset the sky gods. The old man chuckled. But don't you worry, it all gets cleaned up. The old man was right. After we walked out of the cafe where we had breakfast in the town center, there was no sight of red snow anywhere, but I still couldn't get it out of my mind. Jacob and I discussed all the different theories, but finally decided that it was probably a little trick the locals played on visitors. A little mystery to add to the charm of the Christmas town. We spent the rest of the day exploring the town some more. We jumped from shop to shop simply to avoid the cold. It was also the reason we didn't hike up to the castle. I had underestimated how freezing it would be. In the center of town was an old church that seemed really popular. I suggested checking it out, but Jacob was against it because he thought it would be boring. Finally, it started getting dark and we made our way to one of the Christmas markets. This market had dozens of small wooden stalls selling little presents and a bunch of different food. There was a small ice skating rink in the middle and a stage where music was played. The lights and smells of anise and cinnamon pulled you in and made you feel welcome and warm. We had some hot beverages and waffles. We talked to some other people who were visiting town. Everything was close to perfect. And then it started snowing. As those little snowflakes fell from the ground, everything around us came to a sudden halt. It felt as if the people around us stopped moving for just a second, and then there was one communal big breath. That's when everything got out of control. The jolly Christmas music from the stage turned into a distorted mess of sound. The fairy lights started flickering, and suddenly all the people around us started moving in all directions. Some were shouting or screaming even. I was starting to get pushed around, so I grabbed Jacob's arm. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice trembling with fear, but the look on my boyfriend's face was the opposite. He smiled as a snowflake fell on his face. He smudged it away with his finger and left a trail of blood. "It's the beginning of winter, Ava," he said with an eerie calmness. "Isn't it beautiful?" I don't know what happened inside of me next, but I pushed Jacob away and ran with the crowds. The town was still new to me, and at night I didn't recognize much, so I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that something was wrong and that my gut shouted at me to run. On my way through the alleys, I stumbled into a group of people. Their faces were just as calm as Jacob's. A woman smiled and asked me who I was and where I came from. "You're not from here," a man answered before I could say anything. "Who brought you? Are you an offering?" the woman asked. I stumbled back and kept running. I can't say how much time passed until I finally recognized the street where our hotel and Jacob's car were. I didn't have the car key, so I had to get to the room. All I knew was that I wanted to get away from here as fast as possible. The reception was empty and I ran up the stairs to our room. When I opened the door, I realized that Jacob was already there and he was not alone. The old man from the reception was with him. My heart was racing and I contemplated leaving again, but then I thought I might be overreacting. Nothing had happened, and besides, I had nowhere to go. I would probably be safer here with Jacob. "Ava, it's fine, you can come in," he interrupted my thoughts. I stayed frozen in the door. "What's going on?" I muttered. The old man gave me a sympathetic smile. "You are safe, girl. They have found someone else." "Someone else?" Another offer. "Grandpa," Jacob said in a stern voice. "It didn't happen. She doesn't need to know," he whispered. "Yes, I fucking need to know. What is going on? Why did you call this man Grandpa?" I shouted. The fear was replaced with a rush of rage. I started moving towards the window. "You don't want to see this, honey. Stay there," the old man said. But I didn't stop until I was almost at the window. And then I saw what they were looking at. At the house opposite the street, a group of people were standing by a big open window that had a flagpole next to it. When I saw what they were doing, my blood froze. They were hanging up a body on the pole. A million thoughts were running through my mind. But before I could act out on any of them, Jacob had already grabbed my arm. He pushed a syringe into my skin and everything went dark. When I finally opened my eyes, I was sitting in a driving car. It was day. When the memories of the last night came back to me, I grabbed the door handle, but the door was locked. "You want to jump out of a driving car?" I heard Jacob say next to me. His eyes were fixed on the road. My heart was beating so fast that I thought it might jump out of my chest. "Are you all right, honey? You passed out last night after a few too many drin." "Cut the crap," I interrupted him. "What the actual hell happened last night?" He sighed. "So you didn't forget? What a shame." Regret rushed through me. I should have faked it until we were out of the car. "Don't worry. I'm not going to hurt you. I actually really like you, Ava. You might not believe me, but that's a requirement." "Requirement for what?" I whispered. "For the offering, of course. Every December on the first weekend, the blood snow arrives. And those 2 nights each need an offering. I'm really sorry, Ava. But if we don't do it, the snow won't stop. Until it buries us all." He was quiet for a second. "I brought you to my old home, Ava, because you matter to me. And it wasn't certain that you would become a sacrifice, only a possibility. But you were lucky." "Lucky," I repeated. "You weren't chosen. It would have been even better if you got blacked out like on the first night. All would have been fine. But you made things really difficult for me." I had been dating Jacob for a whole year, and I never realized what was wrong with him. I trusted him too much. I don't even know where this hell town is that we visited. Jacob surprised me with the trip, and I slept all the way when we drove there. Now I understand that he probably drugged me then too. I didn't say anything about that. I didn't confront him any further. All I needed was to get away from him. "You said you weren't going to hurt me." Jacob smiled. "I won't. I'll take you back home, or I can drop you off on the way. Grandpa said it would be fine. He said nobody would believe you, even if you told them.